Oh,
absolutely.
Sorry, Alexander. I was dozing off a little bit.
Well, your imitation is the finest form of flattery, Alex. I mean, you're obviously taking your cue from the commander-in-chief himself.
No, everybody.
It proves that you're in total command of the entire situation.
It's impossible to doze off when listening to the Oracle of London. If Biden was listening to you, Alexander, he would be wide awake. What do you think?
Well,
maybe not.
Would I waste my time speaking to him? That's perhaps a more valid question. But anyway, certainly, I'd have a lot to turn him to this morning, or rather, well, it's morning today here in London. Still, well, it's afternoon in London, but I think it's still morning, very early morning in America. So I'm sure he's fast asleep. After his triumph in the elections yesterday, I'm sure he believes it's a triumph. I'm sure that's what he's been told.
Well, he flew in from Scotland last night around 1 a.m. He said, and then he'll get the results. That was his speech before he got on the plane to head back to the U.S. But Alexander, let's just start off with the super chat from Mark Hewitt, who says, we need a similar political earthquake to happen in the UK, maybe if the Reform Party wins the 2 upcoming by-elections. How about that to start it off? I think that's the sentiment that the whole world is feeling actually right now. I feel, it's we need something like this to happen where we are, whether you're in a different state in the United States, whether you're in a different country. What happened yesterday in Virginia, and what's kind of happening in New Jersey, though. New Jersey, it's huge news that it's this close. That it's this close is still big news. The general sentiment is the tide may be turning, and maybe people are waking up. Maybe things are starting to change. The pendulum is swinging. So Mark Hewitt opens up this live stream. Alexander, what do you make of that live stream? And then we'll say hello to everybody.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to say very briefly, he is absolutely right. We do need the same kind of shock here in Britain to the political system, but we are far less likely to get it. And this is where the United States is different from every other Western country, because in every other Western country, all the big European states, pretty much, not the Central and East European states, but in Western Europe and in places like Australia, New Zealand, wherever, the situation has become incredibly closed and incredibly controlled. The United States, probably because of its tradition, its revolutionary tradition from the war, what we called in Britain the War of Independence, and because of the guarantees and the promise contained in the Constitution and the traditions of American society, is much more difficult to control. And therefore you see political energy and political dynamism still continue there. Much more difficult to repeat what has just happened in the United States in Britain. But it has been done. We did get the Brexit vote. But of course, as we've discussed many times, the difference is the Brexit vote depended on the actions of one exceptional political leader, who was Nigel Farage. In the United States, you don't just have one political leader in, say, Donald Trump. You have many more. And that is a fundamental difference.
Yeah. A lot of people came out of Virginia, and their voices were heard, no doubt about it. So hello to everybody that is joining us on this live stream. Hello to everyone that is coming to us from the United States. There are people from Virginia. Good job, everyone in Virginia. Alexander, I spent a lot of time in Virginia. I lived there. I went to school in Virginia, so I have a very warm feeling for that state. I love that state, and good news. Good news. It was a shock to the system. So let's see. Valley S is the great Valley S is helping us with the live chat today, the live stream, as is the legendary Alan Watson as well. I see is in the house. So thank you very much to our moderators. And GEC 812. How can we not forget GEC 812 also helping out to moderate? Thank you very much to our moderators. Wherever you are joining us in the world, I saw United States represented big time. James, yes, James, you are You are with us in this live stream. Good to have you here. I saw Kenya was in the house. I see Denmark is in the house. We have a video on Denmark and Poland coming up soon. Hello from Virginia. Great to have you here from Virginia. Melbourne, Australia is with us. Netherlands is with us. London, Michigan, UK. A lot of people in the UK here today. Great to have you here. Liberal tears are delicious and salty. And salty. I like the description. They're delicious and salty.
Salty. Well, indeed they are. But of course, bear in mind, there are also tears of rage. I mean, these people are not going to be happy with what's happened. Obviously, they're going to be very sorry. But they're not going to be sorry in the way that people used to be when they lost an election, because, you know, that was the political system. You won some, you lost some, you moved on, you planned for the next one. When you have a completely different agenda, which is that you believe that you should be in power always and all the time, and that anybody who threatens you is in some way some terrible person that, you know, must be kept away from power, well, you're going to be very angry when you lose an election as important as this one. Anyway, that's so salty, definitely delicious, undoubtedly, but very angry too.
We'll get into it. We'll break it down. Australia needs to do a Virginia. The secret lies in who the conservative primary candidates are. That's the sentiment around the world, Alexander. So let's break this down. The title for this live stream is "Did Virginia Save the United States of America?" What do you think, Alexander? Did Virginia save the United States of America, and also New Jersey, once again, even if the Democrats pull it off in New Jersey, just the fact that it's this close down to the wire says a lot. What do you make of that title, Alexander?
Right, the political battle is still underway, and it is absolutely impossible to be complacent. But as everybody who has followed us on the Duran will know, I have consistently taken the view, having spent some time in the United States. I've never lived there, but I've traveled there, and having lots of Americans of many different, you know, places from different parts of the United States, I've always felt that ultimately the United States, the if you like, the democratic antibodies that exist there are just too strong in the end to be overcome. And I've always been optimistic that sooner or later you'd see a swing back. And I think it has started. I think that it, in fact, actually, if you go back to the election, the national election, the general election last year, it's always important to say that it was not the big outright knockout win that the Democrats expected they would get. But it was a win. They did get power. They did get control of Congress, tenuous as it was. They did get their hands on the levers of power. They started to try to implement their program. And since then, exactly as I'd expected, and I should say also hoped, because expectations aren't always realized. You know, you always hope for something, but exactly as I'd expected and hoped, we see that people are beginning to organize. People are they were angered by the result last year for reasons we've talked about many times. And they've started to organize, they've started to come out, they're starting to vote, they're starting to push back. And it was in Virginia, they broke through, and Virginia perhaps hasn't saved the Union, but hasn't saved the United States, but it gives us the pathway. It shows the way that it can be done. And what I think is incredibly important about this election is not just that the Democrats lost, but how they lost. What were the issues that united people in Virginia? And it's education. And we know that when people talk about education, of course, they mean education in terms, you know, the conventional sense, the state of schools and other things, but they also mean some of these extraordinary social ideas and ideologies that are being rammed down on people.
Right.
And we see the pushback now, and that, I think, has left the Democrats very shocked. And by the way,
it means family, Alexander.
Well, exactly.
It also means family, which is important.
Exactly. Of course it does. So I think that The Democrats have no real answer to this. I mean, they can't just repudiate what they've been saying for the last 20 years, and which they've now been saying to absolute fever pitch. They can't control the social media activists. I'm choosing my words very carefully, but we all know what I mean. The social media activists who identify people and attack them for all kinds of reasons and try to get them deplatformed or removed when people step out of line. They can't just pull these people back, but we see that it's provoking a very strong electoral reaction. In a state, Virginia, which the Democrats thought they had, I mean, they thought they'd won. They had a very seasoned candidate, somebody who's previously been governor, somebody who, is well known in the state. There might have been a disadvantage, by the way, but somebody who can't be written off, as a novice, somebody who doesn't know how to work this thing. He didn't dare fight on this key issue of education. He tried to play the big game, the big politics game. The Republicans didn't fall for it. They focused with laser precision on the key issue, and they won. And the Democrats are shocked. And we saw Fairfax County the results were being held back, also reminiscent of what happened last year. But this time it didn't make any difference because the result was so clear cut that, whatever was going on in Fairfax County, they just couldn't pull it off in the end.
Yeah, the reaction from the Democrats, from the mainstream media, which is pretty much the mouthpiece of the Democrats and the establishment, was not reflection, not trying to figure out what went wrong. It was, and this is not an exaggeration, Alexander, it was orange man bad.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
I mean, that was the reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. It is absolutely that. I was, and by the way, that's of course in the United States. I live in Britain. I was reading the British media. It was exactly the same. There was an extraordinarily offensive, I mean, really awful article reporting this in The Guardian, which essentially accuses Young King of lying. And I mean, and that's supposed to be reporting. It doesn't actually go into look behind the story, explain things, discuss it in any way. But that's their outlook. So as we said at the beginning, I mean, that delicious and salty, hot and spicy also, because they're very angry at the moment and they can't learn from this, because to do it would be to repudiate their entire ideology, their entire political approach, their whole line of argument, not just over the last 5 years, but over the many years which have preceded this.
That's the problem. This is not about politics. This is not about policy.
No.
This is for the Democrats. This is a religion. This is an ideology. It's a cult. And they can't separate themselves from it. So they're just going deeper. They're doubling down into the racism, into the white you-know-what, and into the orange men bad narrative.
Absolutely.
And my prediction, Alexander, is that they're going to panic more, and they're going to go harder into this passport mandate, white you-know-what, and racist cancel culture, wokeism type of thing. They're not going to pull back, which there's a lot of people saying they'll pull back. Nuh-uh. They're going to drive deeper into it, and they're going to lose even more, because people, I believe, in the United States, and I believe in the world, are sick of this. The people in Virginia showed us that they are the majority. People that are sick of this woke ideology is the majority. But the media and the deep state has made us think we're the minority. And that's wrong. We are the majority, and we shouldn't let the minority fool us into thinking that we're not the majority.
Well, I've never had any doubt about who the majority is, actually. I think the Democrats have this deluded idea that they were the majority. And I mean, historically, the Democratic Party, if you look at the Democratic Party, the Republican Party in the United States, since Franklin Roosevelt, since the New Deal, the Democrats used to be the bigger party. But I think it's been a while since that's been true, actually. And I think that they were utterly deluded to think that if they shouted at people all the time, which is what they do, and harangued them and call them names and smear their leaders or smear other political leaders, that would attract people to them. It doesn't. If you shout at people, this is my invariable experience. You shout at people, what you tend to find is they shout back at you. And that's what the people in Virginia have just done.
Yeah, there was an interesting race as well in New Jersey. I'm looking at the locals stream, and they were tallying up some of the Democrats' massive losses in New Jersey. The state Senate leader and longest-serving legislative leader in New Jersey, a Democrat, lost to a guy with no campaign and just a Facebook profile. I believe that guy was Durr, a trucker, if I'm not mistaken, right? Tepid Slip. I think it was a trucker that actually beat like an establishment Democrat, you know, house member. I mean, just a guy with like $200, and he won, which just shows the anger at how the Democrats are doing things.
Absolutely. Now, can I just say, I mean, in some ways, I mean, Virginia is massive, and we mustn't underestimate it. And they've done. It's an extraordinary change that what has happened in Virginia. And remember, you know, a few months ago, they were sure they would hold on, they would win Virginia. But New Jersey, that they're losing even in places like New Jersey, I think it's going to really worry them, actually. Because to be straightforward about this, if they're not able to win in New Jersey, where in the industrial Northeast can they win? I mean, it begins to look like the whole thing starts to break down and disintegrate. And here I do think that, you know, somebody made this comparison with Britain. I mean, what we're steadily seeing in the US now is that the working class electoral base of the Democratic Party, which, by the way, had been the Democratic Party's core electoral base in the North, even before the New Deal. People don't always understand this, but industrial workers in the United States were starting to vote Democrat back in the 1920s. If the party loses them, then it is in very big trouble, because it always seems to me that the Republicans can win back votes in the suburbs. But if the Democrats lose those working class votes, they won't ever get them back. And that exactly is paralleling what has happened in Britain with the British Labour Party. If you remember, the British Labour Party was, as its name implies, the party of organised labour of the British working class. And what's happening is that English working class voters are now turning against the Labour Party because they don't like its ideology, they don't like its leaders, they disagreed with it profoundly on Brexit, and they swung to the Conservatives. And despite the fact that the Conservatives have had a rocky period since they won power in 2019, they won the election in 2019, their vote remains solid because those voters just won't return to a Labour Party. They're not just alienated from, but ultimately very angry with.
Yeah, this is an interesting super chat from Ryan, because it's not only about Virginia. Yesterday, this was an earthquake throughout the United States. There was a lot of elections taking place in various states and in various districts. And Ryan says that Youngkin won the Hispanic vote by 9 points. Republicans flipped a plus 14 Democrat seat in San Antonio. The realignment is huge. Huge promise moving forward for Republicans.
Well, I think let's now talk about, party politics in a sense, in the sense of the state of the administration. I think the Biden-Harris administration is now essentially mortally wounded. I think that we've been ridiculing and mocking it up to now, but there's been the illusion up to now that has been fostered in America that they won the election, that the tide of affairs was behind them. I think that's gone. I think any idea they had that they'd be able to get through the Senate, that they'd be able to get people like Manchin and Sinema and those sort of people to change position. I think after people have seen these results, they're going to say, no way. And I think that what this talks about, and this is the point we've just heard, is an absolute Republican landslide come in a year's time in the midterms. Because bear in mind, the economic crisis is not going to improve. It's going to get worse. Bank of America is now talking about $120 oil, $120 a barrel. So it's going to get worse. The inflation crisis is going to get worse. We're going to see more taxes because that's what they're going to try and work towards. They're going to have struggle to get them through, and we're going to see higher interest rates. I mean, there'll be enormous resistance from the Democrats over that, but we're going to see it. So the economics are looking very bad. The politics, the culture, social activism isn't going to stop. It's going to get worse. So this reaction is going to build. And can I just also say, as a factor which we have to be extremely careful discussing on a program like this, but there is also across the nation, I am sure, a festering anger about the way in which the election, the general election in November, was conducted. I don't think that issue has ever been resolved. I think the way in which all attempts to sort of consider and examine what happened at that time was swept under the carpet, has let that situation aggravate even more. And we're going to see that all of these things, the economy, the festering anger from the election, and the cultural issues all coming together and shaping together into a landslide in 2022, at which point the Biden-Harris administration is dead, the Democratic project is in crisis, and if you go back to the original question, the original title of this program, well, the USA, as we have known it, will have survived this attempt to replace it with something different, the new Republic of America or whatever it was that they were looking for, that will have failed.
Yeah, well, let's not get too optimistic because here's a super chat. And this kind of plays along with what you just said from Jay Galt that just came in. It says, optimistic, ? Youngkin was at Carlyle for 25 years, part of the banker class pillaging the country. He will not do anything to stop the grift plus the great reset. And so I want to tack on a question to that super chat, and there's a great point brought up by Jay Galt, which is, would you categorize it? I don't want to take anything away from Youngkin. I think he ran a good, balanced campaign. From what I understand, he worked very hard for every vote, whether he's a Carlyle guy. He is a Carlyle guy, but he did work hard, and his strategy worked. It was spot on. But would you say that this election was more about Youngkin or more about a rebuke to the Biden policy, the policy in Virginia, what McAuliffe represented, what he said about education? He is a Clinton machine guy as well. Do you think this was also just kind of a rebuke to say, you know what, we're tired of this ideology. We're tired of trying to tear the United States apart. We don't want any more of this, whether it's education, whether it's passports, mandates, the inflation, the economy, the foreign policy. We don't like it.
Yes.
We need to change course.
Right. Now, I think the questioner has made an entirely valid point, and he points to the great weakness and the big problem. We'll come to that in a moment. Emphatically, I think this was more an election of rejection of the Biden-Harris, Democrat, Clinton, Obama, Kamala Harris agenda, if you like. I am absolutely sure that was what it was. What Youngkin did, and he did run a very good campaign, but he understood, and his advisors, his team, understood that it was this anger against it that was there to be tapped, and they knew how to tap it. So without taking anything from him, the reason he won was not because people, looked upon him as some great, leader, some messiah figure who's coming from nowhere, because bear in mind, he's somebody who's pretty new to politics. They turned to him because he was embodying in this election the opposition, the resistance, if you like, to the agenda that the Democrats and their, fellow travelers in the media and the social media and wherever have been trying to impose upon America. So I think emphatically it was a rejection of that agenda, of that style of politics, of this administration, and of what the Democratic Party has become. Now, having said that, let's talk about Youngkin and the fact that he is from, he's a Carlisle man and all that sort of thing, because that is extremely important. And that, of course, is the key weakness, because at the moment, we still have a situation in America where politics is very much in flux. And what we have is an establishment of which makes up still far and away the greater part of the political class. Most establishment Republicans who are still there in the party are part of the political class that has run with this globalization thing. And we haven't seen yet a rise of new people from the grassroots in every part of the Republican Party, across politics, who are able to replace the old establishment in the way that needs to happen in order to completely secure this victory. But I think that if that is going to happen, if we're going to see in any part of the West that kind of new politician emerge who will be able to pick up all of these ideas and run with them, it will be in the United States, because that's where I came back to that original point that I made in this question. The United States still possesses that political energy that you don't find across in Europe, and that creates openings within the parties, the two big parties, but of course at the moment we're talking about the Republican Party, for new activists, new political leaders, those sort of people to emerge. So yes, Youngkin does belong, if you like, to the establishment. I'm not saying what he's going to do is, he may, be somebody whose actual views are different from, what his background might suggest they are. And he did run a good campaign. But regardless of that, I think we will see people coming forward before very long. Probably we will start to see more of them during the midterms in a few months, in a year's time. And they will constitute a real break with the political class that has held power in Washington for so long now.
Yeah, and we can't forget that McAuliffe did score an own goal, a huge own goal during that debate when he came out and he said that, parents have no right to their children in school. That was a huge own goal. But you give credit to Youngkin and his team that capitalized on that own goal. So, yes, so we just can't forget the dynamics of how the change occurred.
Yeah, I mean, the reason we talk about it as an own goal is because this is one moment when McAuliffe said what he thinks. It's what most Democrats
He said the truth in his mind, yeah.
Exactly. And of course, that was what made that such a powerful event, because when people heard him talking like that, they said, this is what these people think. This is what Kamala Harris thinks. This is what Hillary Clinton thinks. This is what Biden and all of that crowd, really think. So when we talk about it as an own goal, it was an own goal in the sense that, he played a more, shall we say, duplicitous and insincere campaign. He might have done better. But the nature of the own goal, which highlights, as I said, what he really believes and what Democrats really believe, crystallizes their problem. Because, you can make mistakes in a campaign. Everybody makes mistakes in a campaign, by the way. Every single political leader makes mistakes in campaigns. Donald Trump, in 2016 made many. But if the tide is behind you, if you make slips and drop clangers, but people overall like what you say, then it doesn't matter. Whereas if people are already deeply suspicious of you, if they are very, very troubled by your policies, and you come along and you say something which confirms all those suspicions that people already have and confirms all those concerns they have about your policies, well, that's fatal. So that highlights how brittle the Democrats' position is today.
It also shows how arrogant the Democrats have become, because I believe that McAuliffe said that believing that, one, no one's going to, that people are going to agree with him. Number one, he thought people are going to agree with him. And number two, no one can touch him. McAuliffe, I used to be governor. I'm part of the Clinton machine. I'm part of the Democrats. We're getting everything we want now. We're going to do the Build Back Better, rerun the show, our ideology, our wokeism. This is the future. This progressivism is the future. And he thought that, he's untouchable. It's kind of, it gave us a glimpse of that untouchable feeling that these guys have. And the people of Virginia said, not so fast. We're not going to have any of this stuff in our state.
Absolutely. Now, bear in mind, first of all, I don't think McAuliffe realized that he was making a mistake when he said those words, because I think he is as disconnected from, as I said, sentiments, the feelings of people, as you say.
He believes it, though. He believes those. That's why he believes those words.
He believes it. He believes those words. But bear in mind that Garland, the Attorney General, is just setting, he's instructing the FBI to monitor school boards and what parents say on school boards. So, what McAuliffe, the comment he made is exactly in line with Garland's policy. And that is an incredibly sinister development that, they're monitoring what goes on in school boards, and, they're diverting the FBI from fighting criminals, watching terrorists, doing the sort of things, dealing with counter-espionaging, all the kind of things that the FBI is supposed to be doing, to doing things like that. And that tells you a great deal about the thinking of these people. And it's not something that people don't notice. The fact that the FBI, the administration, the Justice Department is now using the FBI in that kind of way is going to alarm a lot of people right across the United States.
They're completely aligned. McAuliffe, Garland, all these people are aligned in where they want to take the U.S. And they are the minority. They're the minority.
Well, in any political system, we could say this straightforward. I mean, this is a point that is so obvious. You could call it banal. In no political system do people want to be oppressed. I mean, that's almost by definition. I mean, nobody votes to be placed under surveillance. To be placed under surveillance when they say things on school boards. I mean, that isn't something that's going to make people like the people who are doing it and the people who are proposing it. You can scare people up to a certain point into going along with you, either by, conjuring up imaginary enemies or by, to be straightforward about it, threatening them. But you won't win people's, loyalty or affection by doing things like that. And what you're actually doing, in fact, and we see this in the United States at the moment, is you're making people resentful and angry with you and determined to vote you out of power.
Yeah, agreed. W. Baker says, who will rid us of the Bushes or the Majors of the Carlyle group? Who will rid us of these people?
Well, indeed, yeah. Reminds me of the words of Henry II about Thomas Becket. Who will rid me of this turbulent priest? Who will rid us of these turbulent people? Well, we have to do that through the ballot box. That's the way that it's done in the United States. It's not straightforward. We know that there's many reasons to be, to to organize well and carefully. We saw how that happened in the last year, how important it was to organize. But, again, it seems to me that people are using their votes much more calculatedly, with much more intelligence, much more awareness. And as I said, there is still, it seems to me, across the United States, a festering anger left over from the events of last year.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hunger says Virginia is a case of electing the outer party and not the inner party. Never forget, conservatism is progressivism driving the speed limit. This is not a victory. It's an anger release valve.
Well, I think that is true, but that at the present moment in time does count actually as a victory. I think that there is more of a difference between the inner and the outer party in this situation than there was in Orwell's book. And bear in mind that in Orwell's book, 1984, the inner party didn't trust the outer party, and they had the thought police to keep watch on them. So it already speaks of a fragility in the system. And there's an awful lot of people who voted. And as I said, they may not have voted particularly for young kid. And I don't know that they know very much about him. I suspect they quite were attracted to him because he ran a good campaign. But they voted because they were opposed to certain things more than because they supported, this is my clear view, supported the particular candidate.
Yeah. GEC says, while Biden administration may be a factor, it seems to be local issues seemed a bigger factor. Rural Virginia letting their votes count.
Well, yes, but local issues that are the same local issues across the entire United States. That's the important thing to say. I mean, if you're talking about education, the kind of education programs that we're talking about in Virginia that created so much tension there and played such a galvanizing issue there, they are reproduced right across the blue states, right across the union. So I mean, it's a local issue that has a national dimension, and we saw the others, the other viewers who made the point that in fact the swing was not confined to Virginia. There have been results in New Jersey. There was results in San Antonio. There were results in many other in many other places, and the direction is clear.
Yeah, very clear. The more rebel governors are elected, is from Hunger. The more rebel governors are elected, the more the left will attack states' rights. The left always overreacts. They have no ideology. They are a mechanism for seizing total power. I agree. They will overreact. They will go deeper into this this ideology, and the media, I believe, is actually kind of happy with the results. I think they're happy with the results because they can continue to bring up the orange man bad narrative in their broadcast because they believe that talking about Trump is what gets them ratings. So I think the media is kind of like, you know what, this is not bad for us because we can now talk 24/7 about the orange man again.
Absolutely, I entirely agree with that. And I mean, we're going to see, the politics of hysteria and the politics of rage are going to be cranked up to levels, we've not seen before. I mean, be straightforward about this. I have to, as part of the work we do for the Duran, I read the other side too. I mean, I go to places like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Nation, those sorts of places. And I read the kind of language these people use and the apocalyptic way in which they already speak. And that was before these results. God help us what they're going to be saying and doing now, especially with the midterms looming. One thing it might do, and I'm not certain that it will, is that already I get the strong impression is that the radical progressive wing, I use those words in inverted commas, by the way, but we know what I'm talking about, the militant wing, if you like, of the Democratic Party, and also some of the sort of DNC, power brokers are becoming seriously worried that the president is simply not able to lead in any kind of effective way, and is not able to unite even that part of the Democratic Party coalition behind him. And the progressive, the militant wing, is very angry with him, because as far as they're concerned, he's not delivering as much as they wanted. And those people, if you don't give them everything, they are as angry as they would be if you gave them nothing. I mean, that's one of the odd things about militant Democrats at the moment. And so I would not be surprised if we start to see deeper factional infighting within the party at the same time as they become ever more aggressive towards the Republicans, towards the Conservatives, and trying to mobilize social media and all the usual apparatus of whatever against them. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if this hastens the day when there's a decision to push the President Biden himself to one side.
I was just going to say that, Alex. I was just going to ask you that question. How long can this theater last? We saw the results of Biden in at the Vatican. We saw the results of Biden at the G20.
Yeah.
The whole world saw Biden dozing off at the COP26, the most important event in all of history, and he was asleep. We saw the results. We understand the theater. We know he has a sound stage across the street from the White House. We've seen Kamala Harris speaking with child actors. The whole world is seeing this. World leaders are moving away from the Biden administration. They want nothing to do with it. We're definitely in a bipolar world at this very moment. The world has split in two factions. The Democrats, I believe they want nothing to do with Biden at this point, whether it's progressives or whether it's even Nancy Pelosi. I believe now, after this result, they're going to say, we just can't support this guy anymore. We can't prop this guy anymore. And the choice of Kamala is not as good either. I mean, they're probably looking at Kamala and saying, but if we get rid of this guy, then we have her. But how long can this last? It's all crumbling. And I agree, as this crumbles, they're going to lash out even more against the quote unquote deplorables and domestic terrorism and Garland's FBI witch hunts of people that aren't supporting the narrative and aren't supporting the agenda. I mean, things are going to come to a head very, very quickly. How long, though, can this administration last? I see it's all crumbling.
I think absolutely. Now, the question is this: will it crumble before or after the midterms? The problem is that the Democrats have maneuvered themselves into a trap, because they came up, we talked about it last year, we're talking about this right through the election last year. They decided to pick Biden, even though they were perfectly well aware that Biden was Biden. He had all his issues, which we all know what they are. But they decided to go for him because they wanted somebody who they thought wouldn't scare too many Republicans away. And they assumed that there would be an enormous landslide in November, that they would sweep the House, they would sweep the Senate, they would have a big vote behind them in the presidential election, a huge majority. Then, Biden, that would enable them to carry out all the various tremendous transformative reforms that they were aiming for, a kind of 100 days like, Roosevelt had, only, of course, very different, profoundly different from Roosevelt's. And, of course, what they got instead was, firstly, it didn't turn out, they didn't win that landslide last year. And the result was that they were beached with a president who was completely incapable, because they thought it wouldn't matter, because they would be so strong that they would be able to carry a Biden. Now they discover that because they weren't as strong as they expected, Biden is weighing them down. And they don't really know what to do, because the Constitution is very clear. If the president stands down or is incapable of carrying out his duties, it's the vice president who takes over. But the vice president, who was, I suspect, always the person who was ultimately expected to lead, has proved to be not just unpopular, but also incompetent. So she would be probably even less successful in this scenario than Biden is. So they are stuck. they didn't work it out properly last year because they didn't run a proper campaign last year, to say it, straightforwardly. And so they're now in a position, they're in a trap, and I don't really know what to do, because they are still confined by the mechanisms of the Constitution. And though I think they would love to find some way of leveraging Biden out and then finding a way of getting rid of Kamala herself, it isn't easy. I mean, it's not clear how you do it and preserve the constitutional forms.
You know what else is interesting? The Biden White House, the Biden team, the Democrats, they've become lazy and stupid because they fully depend on the mainstream media covering up for them. They depend on the deep state covering up for them, and they have no more creativity. They're not scrappy. They don't know how to handle things anymore, how to manage things and administer. And in case in point, the chants that we hear about Biden, whether it's using the F-bomb or whether it's using the Brandon chant that's everywhere. It is everywhere. It's everywhere. It's on TV. It's on live sporting events. It's on signs. I mean, it's on memes. It's T-shirts. It's everywhere. But you know what? The Democrats, the Biden White House, they don't address it. They don't. No. They haven't figured out a way to address it. They have to address it. They have to figure out. They're not sitting back and saying, why does everyone hate us so much?
Yeah.
And that's a good question for them to ask. Why do they hate us so much?
No, they don't.
Why? And they should address it, and they should find ways to fix it. But they don't. They try to bury it. They get the media to cover up for them. They try to get the deep state to put people in jail. Try to figure out every single way to handle this instead of facing it head on.
They spread false stories about a certain laptop, which they don't want to discuss or talk about either. Yep. They do all those sort of things. No, you're absolutely right. They are so protected and so insulated from the real life, the real pulse of political life and the pulse of feeling amongst the American people, that they've lost touch with them, which is, of course, what always happens when a party consolidates itself and tries to run things in this kind of way. Sorry to sort of bring this parallel up. We're doing on Locals, we're doing a series of history programs about Russia.
And on YouTube
and on Rumble, but about the Russian Empire and how it broke down. But if you come to the Soviet Union, if you go to the Soviet Union, that's exactly what happened to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Whatever else it was, at the beginning, when they seized power, they were, very, very tough revolutionaries who did understand an awful lot about society and how society worked. By the time the whole thing fell apart, they'd become lazy, complacent, incompetent, corrupt. They'd completely lost track of what to do. And the same decay is overtaking the Democrats at this moment because they're so insulated behind the wall of the deep state, the media state, the social media state, that, they don't have to do normal politics anymore in the way that the Democrats used to do incredibly well, and in which America, because of its democratic traditions, demands of its politicians. So that's a fundamental problem they have. By the way, on the Brandon point, something else, which is, of course, they've completely lost their sense of humor, which is one of the most, all the jokes are coming from the other side, or not just the jokes, but the jokes that catch fire, that circulate, that people laugh about and reproduce on their T-shirts and things of that kind. When the Democrats try to do jokes, they're hideously, embarrassingly, cringingly unfunny, and really nasty as well. And of course, given how pompous and portentous and self-important they've become, who's surprised? I mean, so they've totally lost their sense of humor. And in a political system like that of the United States, or at least, shall we say, more the historic political system of the United States, if you don't have humor, if you don't have that sense of fun, that sense of enjoyment about politics, that sense of zest, and going out and being able to laugh with people, then, as I said, it isn't going to work. You're going to lose. I mean, people, there's this expression, we have it in Britain: laugh and the world laughs with you, cry and you cry alone. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it certainly is true in politics, and it's certainly true in the politics of the United States. They don't know how to laugh. They don't know how to joke. They don't know how to give a sense of fun, to convey optimism, to convey energy. And that's why when something like this happens, the Brandon episode, which is a ridiculous one anyway, pretending, that this is whatever it was, it was all about Brandon. It wasn't about...
That's how they could have squashed it, though, with humor. Way in the beginning. They could have squashed it easily if they were just, they made a joke about it, or they said, yeah, what can we do? That MSNBC host was being dumb or something. They could have figured out a million ways to squash it, but they have no humor anymore. Who wants to hang out with people that are miserable all the time, that are activists all the time? No one wants to hang out with people like that.
Who are angry all the time. They're angry all the time, and who are threatening and menacing and abusive and quick to take offense at the slightest thing. I don't know whether, this is of course in Britain, but Terry Gilliam, the Monty Python.
Yeah, I heard. My God.
I know. You can't
explain the story a little bit, Alexander. Explain the story.
He was supposed to, there's a Stephen Sondheim musical, which he was going to put on at the Old Vic, which is one of the big theatres in Britain. This is, by the way, Terry Gilliam, who, I don't know much about him. I've never met him or I know anything about him, but I presume that politically, historically, he's been on the left. Anyway, that's the old left. Now, of course, he said certain things which all the usual crowd are really angry with. And there was this big campaign also by some playwrights and by some of the staff at this theatre. And the theatre, of course, crumbled in the face of all the pressure. And the whole production that Terry Gilliam was supposed to direct has been called off. And this is one of the most iconic comedians in not just Britain, but in the West. But he's American, remember, by the way. I'm sure that's right. So, Monty Python, for God's sake. This humorous thing. It's...
You would never be able to have Monty Python today.
Oh, no.
In the US or in the UK, if Monty Python came out today, it would never make it.
Well, absolutely. Go to The Life of Brian, one of this famous film they did, and that discussion about when they're all talking about the true enemies of the Judean People's Front, or the People's Front of Judea, and actually listen to what they're talking about. The sort of, because it's exactly the kind of cultural issues that we're talking about now. That whole dialogue today would get you in very serious trouble. Well, first, it wouldn't just get you in serious trouble. If you try to make a film like that today, that film would not be shown.
I don't think there are writers that are clever enough in Hollywood today to put out a script like that. No, they're just not clever. They don't have that type of smarts anymore. It's just not there.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. But as I said, if they did exist, if writers of that ability existed, they would be too scared to put their pen to paper. And we come back to this point about humor, because of course it's that particular dialogue. I suggest, if people have their DVDs or Blu-rays of that film, just go back and listen to what the argument is all about and what they're talking about there. Anyway,
let's take a question from locals here. Looking a couple of years into the future, the big showdown is whether the executive branch will be able to bring the interagency, the deep state, or whatever you want to call it, to heel. That's an interesting comment. What do you make of that? That is the big fight, isn't it?
That is exactly the big fight, and it is comparable, but much greater in scale, to what Putin had to face in Russia when he took over in the early 2000s. When, as we remember, in Russia, power was actually wielded by the so-called oligarchs. And he had to find some means to break them and bring them down and reassert the authority of the executive, the accountable executive. But Putin's job is a minor one compared to what the executive would have to achieve in the United States, because the enemy is within, in a way that it wasn't the case in Russia. The deep state, the interagency exists. That's one of the most interesting facts that we learned as a result of the first Trump impeachment, that the deep state has a name for itself. It calls itself the interagency. So the deep state, the interagency exists. It is enormously powerful. It is prepared to act and try to mobilize in Congress to impeach a president who goes against its policies, which is an astonishing thing. That is a total violation of the whole fundamental principle of the US Constitution. And the great issue is, will we return to the situation that is set out in the Constitution and envisaged by the founders, where the executive, headed by the president, accountable to the people in the elections, whether that is in control or whether the interagency is. And that's an absolutely profound and entirely correct point. That is going to be a titanic struggle. But in order to do it, you have to have control of Congress and of the presidency at the same time. And when I mean control of Congress, I don't mean that have Republican majorities in Congress, because if you have Republican majorities in the Senate, which are controlled by Mitch McConnell, then the interagency is happy because they own him just as much as they own Schumer or anyone else.
Yeah. Make it easy. Assange says, Alexander, I feel your pain. Terry Gill is a vessel. He's obviously been hanging around, indulged culture.
Yeah. I'm not going to say more.
We'll leave it there. And Make it easy. Assange also says, Alexander, the fable of the town mouse and the country mouse is fitting for current politics. We can't do both, and the cities are a bit silly. I'm
not sure I completely understand that, but
the fable of the town mouse and the country mouse.
Yes. I mean, Aesopian. It sounds a bit Aesopian. I'm afraid I'm not. I don't think I'm really familiar with that one, but still.
If make it easy, Shan, if you want to put in the live stream, some more context to that, I'll read it out in the live stream. Dr. Detroit says, don't get ahead of yourselves. Not all the cemeteries in Virginia have reported in yet. Well said. Well said there.
This proves, you see, I mean, we were underestimating the support for the Democrats. I mean, the dead are so enthusiastic for them. They're rushing out to vote.
Yeah. I mean, if Youngkin won by around 3 points was the last I saw, 3-4 points. It was probably a lot more than that.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. Well, when I finally went to bed, and we've got different time zones here, he was leading by around 10 points. I seem to remember.
The final numbers are around 3 to 4.
I know. But I did say to myself, that's probably just about a big enough margin to make it very difficult. This is about 70% of the vote counted to make it very, very difficult to close that gap. But then, one always wonders, if it had been 5%, he'd have lost.
Yeah, I agree. That's the problem with New Jersey, is that the margin is too close for the Republican to pull it out. Exactly. But it's still, the fact that it's that close is big news. Yeah. Very big news. Maria sends a super chat which says 2022. Yep. That's what we're looking forward to now. 2022. That'll be a big election.
I think there are going to be some people in the party, the Democratic Party, who are going to be very worried about 2022. And coming back to that earlier point that Alex was making, I think they're going to be going around saying, look, we can't wait until after the midterms. If we keep the situation as it is now,
that's the debate.
Then we're going to be smashed. And I'm sure that there are now, at this moment in time, discussions within the party about how to find a way around. Not easy. as I said, because they've trapped themselves because they didn't expect to be in this position, and the Constitution doesn't make it easy for them to maneuver their way out of it. I mean, the reason it doesn't make it easy for them to maneuver their way out of it was because, of course, the founders imagined a completely different style of politics to the kind of court intrigue, which is what the Democrats now engage in.
Make no mistake about it. The big debate that they're having right now, and I'll simplify it out a little bit, is do we keep this guy in power or not? That's a debate. Do we pull him before 2022, or do we try to carry him over past 2022? That's what they're going to be discussing. The Pelosi's, the Obamas, the interagencies, all these people, they're going to sit there and they are going to argue about what do we do now? Do we pull the ripcord, or do we try to hang on to the sinking ship called Biden?
I agree. The problem they have is, I mean, let's just outline a scenario. He resigns for reasons of ill health. I don't think they'd want to go through the whole process of saying that, he's incapable of doing things. They'd persuade him to resign, or they'd announce that he'd resigned because of ill health. Kamala takes over. She appoints a new vice president. At some point, she steps down. The new vice president takes over. That would be a vice president, however, as a new president whom no one had elected. That wouldn't be very good at all. I mean, one could easily see how that could backfire hideously. But that's the only mechanism I can think of out of this problem.
Yeah, they really box themselves in. All right, Julian is a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Julian. And Dearer Spider says Youngkin was clearly the better choice of the two. Virginians, get familiar with your recall process, and if Glenn backstabs, dump him ASAP.
Absolutely true. I mean, I agree with that entirely. I mean, that is real politics. I mean, you appoint somebody, if he turns out to be an effective Democrat, carries on the same policies, people in Virginia are unhappy, they recall him, and then they elect someone else. I mean, that's politics. That is how politics should be conducted.
Yeah. David Williams says the Gerald Ford problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Gerald Ford maxed out times 100.
I know. Well, absolutely, because thing about Gerald Ford was he was an amiable man. I mean, I remember him. I mean, he was a bit clumsy and perhaps a bit goofy. He was nobody's fool, contrary to what people say. But I mean, he did suffer from the big problem that he was unelected. He became president who nobody had ever elected, and it was a serious problem for him. Looking at the Democrat Party today, I don't see anybody in the party. That's the other problem they have. I don't see anybody who would have even the caliber of Gerald Ford. I mean, and that's our criticism of Ford. I mean, he was an amiable man, but I don't see anybody in the Democratic Party who the Democrats would either, one, trust, and at the same time, two, would really appeal to the American people, would be attractive, has visible presidential material. I just don't see anyone. And that's another major problem they've got, because, again, running their party like a machine has deprived it of real political leaders.
They have no one. They have no one in the starting lineup, Alexander. They have no one on the bench. When you look at the Democrats, they have no one to run in 2024, in 2028, in 2022. I mean, they really have no one. They have no thinkers. They have no leaders. Nobody. I can't think of anybody in that party that can lead. No one. But I look at the Republicans. They definitely have a leader. Whether you like Trump or not, he's definitely a leader. But they also have a lot of players, and they have a bench. They have guys like Rand Paul. They have guys like DeSantis. You could even throw in people like Josh Hawley, and there's a lot of people that they can field, and young leaders as well. So it's not looking good for the Democrats.
And that's the point I come back to, which I made earlier about Youngkin. He may be an establishment figure, but within the Republican Party, there are rising leaders, younger leaders, who are more different. They're more connected to the grassroots than to the establishment. You don't have anybody like that in the Democratic Party, unless you consider, Alexander AOC to be that sort of a person. I mean,
no way. Oh my God, that would be a disaster. Let's see. GEC says, your opinion on effect of ESG, environmental, social, and governance funds regarding promoting virtue signaling and wokeism, thanks to the combo of incentives and direct funds. That's one of two. And the second part is ESG funds, which total 38 trillion out of more than 100 trillion. Global asset under management will grow to 53 trillion by 2025, according to Bloomberg News. You're familiar with ESG, right?
Absolutely. I didn't. I mean,
social credit score of corporations, I guess, is the easy way to.
I know. I wasn't aware that the funds controlled like that are that huge. But you've quoted Bloomberg, and assuming it is Bloomberg, well, that again tells. First of all, I mean, this is a terrible thing. It's deeply worrying. But again, it tells you the enormous challenge that's being faced today, and the enormous danger that there is today from this sort of thing. I mean, this is I'm going to say it's a cancer, to be straightforward about it. One that has to be brought under control and ultimately cut out.
Yeah, that's how they'll get the control and the social credit system into societies like the United States, is via the corporation.
Absolutely, and of course, to be straightforward about it, it plays a big role in elections too. When you're talking about these sums of money on this kind of scale, well, I was reading recently an article, I think it was in the Federalist, about the money that was used in 2020 to organize, again, I'm going to say activism in many of the states, and to organize mail-in ballots and those sort of things. And the sums are just enormous.
Yeah. It is a cancer. I think you're exactly right, Alexander. Let's see. Leafy Bug from Local says, Biden will either serve out the term or leave on his own terms. He can credibly threaten to do enough damage on his way out that no one would dare try to strike at him. He knows where all the bodies are buried, how he came to be president, and what was done for this to happen. He could take the entire show down with him if he wanted to. If nothing else, Biden is backroom wheeler and dealer. Even if he's operating at 50%, that's more than enough for him to be dangerous. Alexander, we did a video that's going to go up. I'll try to get it up today, where you called Biden a machine politician. Yeah. I think that was the best description of Biden. He was never a smart guy. He was never a good speaker. He was never a leader. He was never creative. He was never charismatic. He was just a machine guy that rose up the ranks and just happened to be the person, the only one that the Democrats could put in the primaries to win. I mean,
that is exactly right, and that's what I'm going to say this about that question, because I think the viewer is absolutely right. If Biden were a slightly different political leader than he actually is, he could do and would do all those things. He would fight for his presidency. He would threaten to, say where all the bodies are. He would do all of those things. But I don't think he is. I think ultimately he will do as he's told, because that's what Biden does.
Company man.
I don't exactly. He is not somebody who's going to hold out in that kind of way. That assumes him to be a more real political leader than he actually is or has ever been.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. Thank you for that question. That was a great comment. Where are we here? Let's see. Magnesia Shan says, I see all America commercialized themselves from the head down.
Well,
that's an interesting comment.
Not all America. I mean, let's not exaggerate. And by the way, I've been hearing about the commercialization of America ever since I can remember. People talking about this in the 60s. It is a country that retains enormous vitality. I mean, at the same time, there's this tackiness, there's vulgarity, there's all that in America. There's commercialization. There's a lot of that in other places too. I mean, people always ignore this. These are not unique things in America. And as I said, let's not say that the whole of America is like that. There is, as I said, political energy, there's enormous decency, there's courage, there's imagination, and there's politics. We don't have that in Europe at the moment. I mean, go to France and see how manipulated the election is being there. And go to Germany and look at the kind of elections they've just had. And America suddenly looks very, very, very much more promising and optimistic than those countries do.
Yeah, that is spot on. I agree with that totally. It's no matter how much you criticize America, one thing that they definitely have, and one of the reasons I love the United States so much, is the imagination and the creativity. And it's that spirit that right when you think all is lost, something happens that, you just sit there and you say, wow, this country, these people, they don't give up. They don't give up, and they're going to continue to fight for what they believe. And it's that imagination that I don't see where I am right now in Europe. I mean, I look around and I see just a defeated population, population.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, take Greece, country that we both know. I was looking at some figures the other day, and I was astonished to see that nominal GDP in Greece has halved since 2008. Halved. It's not, we're not talking about, a recession. We're talking about an economic implosion. What are the people doing? Are they protesting? Are they striking? Are they organizing? Are the new parties emerging? Are people coming up with ideas? There is nothing. It's a political desert. And in some places in Europe, you see flickers of life, but nothing like on the scale that you will see in the United States.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the live stream. Someone says, Alex, you're confusing the USA with Russia. Actually, you know what? That's a good point, because I will say this, Alexander. The US and Russia, they have more in common than the mainstream media and the politicians would like you to believe. The two societies really have a lot in common in a lot of different areas.
One reason, by the way, why at a personal level, some Russians and some Americans get on very well with each other. Actually, that is profoundly true. Russia again has political energy. I mean, look at the country in the 1990s. I mean, everything had failed. Everything was falling apart. There didn't seem to be any point where it could recover from. It was a far worse way than the United States is today. And then suddenly everything turned, and it began to pick itself up and get itself together in ways that has astonished everybody. And I don't know where it is. Maybe it's because these are big countries that gives them that kind of confidence and that political strength, that sense that they can't be controlled fully in the way like these smaller, older societies are. Russia, by the way, and I think this is an important point to make, it's got a very old prehistory going all the way back to the 10th century. But in fact, if you're talking about its political institutions, it's not actually an old country by European standards. And it also has that creative energy and activity. It expresses itself in a profoundly different way from the way that you see in the United States. But that Alex is absolutely right. Russia and America far more in common with each other than people would like you to think.
Yeah, there's no reason they should be enemies at all. As a matter of fact, if they worked together, miracles would happen.
Absolutely. They're natural friends. I mean, they have so much that is so similar. They're natural friends.
Yeah. Let's see. Locals here. W. Baker says, Pat Buchanan used to say the same thing about Russia and the United States. Yes, he did. Absolutely. And W. Baker also says, explain the European psychology. Actually, I think we're going to explain a lot of the European psychology through the shows that we're doing on the history of Russia and Europe pre-World War I and during World War I and after. I think that's going to explain a lot how Europe ended up in the mess that it's in.
Absolutely.
What do you think? Yeah,
absolutely. I think we should certainly. One two good countries to start with in terms of historical programs like that of Germany and France, because politics in Germany and France before the First World War were very interesting, and Germany in particular. There are some resemblances, again, it's very uncanny resemblances to the political situation in Germany today, a country that is overambitious, at the same time very insecure, and with a political class, a political system that's closed. So, we could look at that. And of course, France is a state of perennial apparent instability, but one in which the political class tries to control everything. So, it's strange how patterns in some societies reproduce themselves. And they do in Britain too, by the way.
Marit says, people should not compare the American leaders to Stalin. It would be an insult to his memory. He was highly competent and reinstated many Russian values. He thought of his country, made it a superpower.
Well, lots to talk about Stalin, and the one observation I would agree is that whatever you may think of Stalin, I mean, if he looked at the American leaders of today, the Pelosi's, the Schumers, and the rest, he'd have them for breakfast, quite frankly. But then the Russians have them for breakfast anyway, so I don't know that that's very much different.
Yeah, he would have them for breakfast. But thank you very much, Henri, for that super chat. But it did make me uncomfortable reading that super chat a bit. I was a little bit of an uncomfortable super chat to read. But we appreciate it, Henri, very much. Joseph says, conservative politicians are on the same donor payrolls as the liberals. The U.S. is a superpower for rent to the highest bidder.
Yes, again, I think there is a huge amount of truth to that, and yet it's not the entire truth. This is, again, the point I was getting to. If the whole of America were like that, then a Donald Trump presidency would have been impossible. Just for this, for example. So that's the point about the United States. There is a vitality in the political system which defies control. You can do everything you want. You can try and buy everybody, control everything, and somehow, somewhere, something comes up which upsets everything, and things turn out other than you expect. Now, it's a good question. I mean, I'm not a sociologist. It's a very good question why America has that energy and that optimism, and Europe doesn't. But it does. And, at the moment, that's the important thing to hold on to.
Yeah, RT reporting that McAuliffe has conceded.
Okay, so that's interesting.
That's done.
Yeah, that's done. Yeah,
that's done. All right. Magnesia Shan says, LOL, I'd love to hear the Mince Alan Jones from Australia would make of Kamala if she dares.
Well, again, I'm not familiar with the person, but I'd be very interested to know anybody's views on Kamala. Perhaps the most interesting views of all, the ones that I would really love to know, are the ones within the Vietnamese Communist Party's Politburo, because she had an absolutely disastrous trip to Vietnam. I mean, it is one of the most ludicrously bad trips a foreign leader has ever done to another country. I mean, she managed to say all the wrong things, upset and annoy and antagonize and offend the Vietnamese to an extraordinary degree. And I do wonder what the Vietnamese afterwards were saying about her to each other.
Yeah. She's, oh boy, she'll be more entertaining than Biden. That's for sure. And Biden has provided a lot of interesting subjects for us to report on.
Absolutely, she'd be dangerous too. But then I'm not sure she'd be
very dangerous.
Very dangerous. But I'm not sure she'd be more dangerous than what we have at the moment, actually, where, as I said, everybody does their own thing, and the result is, a situation which is, absolute disaster. I mean, somebody, I think it might even have been Patrick Buchanan, said that they've replaced. He was talking about the Taiwan situation, but you could talk about every area of diplomacy that they engage in. They've replaced strategic ambiguity with strategic incoherence, because that's what they are. They are totally incoherent.
Well, the interesting thing about a Harris presidency would be that she would actually believe that she's president because of her ability and because she's the right person for the job, and she would actually want to rule. But the reality of it would be that Obama and Susan Rice and these people would be kind of telling her, no, Kamala, we're running the show. You're just, sitting in the Oval Office, and, you're just a placeholder. And I think that tension would really be interesting to see how that would unfold, because she would actually believe, no, I'm making decisions. But Obama, who put her there in the Obama camp, and the Susan Rices and all these people would be like, no, you just sit there, take orders from us.
That's entirely correct. Now, can I just go back to that thing I said? You get the way to do it. The only way I can think of constitutionally to change this team would be for Biden to resign, Kamala to take over, Kamala to appoint a vice president, and then Kamala to step down so that vice president.
Yeah, but her ego, that's my point. Her ego would not let her.
Biden would go along with it. Kamala would not. That is the problem. You're absolutely right. She would not agree to that. So you could leverage Biden out because he's, loyal and a company man, and he will do as he's told. Kamala isn't like that at all. She's incompetent. She's arrogant. She's vain. She's deeply unpopular, but she's absolutely convinced that she's the right person to lead the United States. No one else might agree with her, but she believes it, and she would fight. And it would be extremely difficult to leverage her out. I mean, as I said, the Democrats messed it up completely in 2020. They didn't think through the team they wanted. They wanted somebody who they could put up against Trump. As I said, an El Cid figure. Everybody, I think, knows the Charlton Heston film where you have the Spanish warrior hero tied to his horse and leads his men into battle, and in fact he's actually dead. Nobody realizes it, but they all pretend that he's alive and leading them to victory. So could do that with Biden, but Kamala isn't like that. They went for the El Cid Biden candidate, and for the vice president it was all factional. It was all, the Obama faction wanted its person in the vice presidency. And so they went along with Kamala for that reason. But they didn't think through how they would govern the United States if they didn't win that huge landslide they were expecting last November. Because, of course, nobody in the Democratic Party was prepared to contemplate the possibility of not winning that landslide in November, because ideologues, if you're talking about ideologues, they don't consider possibilities that conflict with their ideological framework, their ideological beliefs. They assume that things will always turn out as they expect them to.
Yeah. Leafybug says, being a narcissist is almost a prerequisite for anyone who seeks the presidential office. Biden won't take one for the team. It's not in his DNA. He won't be pushed out, and he will threaten all kinds of terrible things if they try to get rid of him.
Yeah, but you see, this is it. I don't think he really is somebody. I think he was maneuvered into stand.
Maybe a younger Biden might.
Maybe a younger Biden. As I said, I understand the point. But on this point, this is one point where I still think, as I said, if he's told to go, he will leave.
Yeah. I question how much he even wants to be there at times. I'm sure there are times that he enjoys the theater of being president, but I think there are other times where he just wants to go to bed. He just wants to sleep and rest and not deal with this stuff.
I completely agree. I think he looks, to me at least, a tired man, actually. And I mean, he's achieved the ambition. He's become president of the United States, what he always wanted to be. And I think, frankly, if he's told to go, he will go. He's got the pension. He's got the pension. He's got all the entitlements that go with it. I think he'll go away quietly and accept them. Kamala, totally different animal. She will fight to hold on to the presidency to the bitter end.
Yeah, there was something about the body language of Biden when he was sleeping during the COP26, where, a lot of people are focusing on the fact that he was closing his eyes and he was sleeping, which, it's understandable. Boring speeches boring conference. If Biden had just come out and said, yeah, it's boring, you would sleep if you were at that conference too. That would make him a lot more relatable. But
it'd be humor though, which is
humor. They don't have humor. Yeah, they don't have humor. But when he woke up, when he came to, the body language of him putting his hands on his eyes, it was kind of that body language of, God, I hate this job.
Yeah.
That's what it reminded me of. It's like and we've all been there where we've worked a job that we hate and we're just sitting at the desk and we're just like, oh my God, I hate this place. That's what I saw when I saw him wake up. He was just like, oh, get me out of here.
That was exactly the impression I came away with too, actually. I mean, I didn't get the sense that he was enjoying himself at all. I don't think he's enjoyed it at any point, actually.
Yeah, he wants out. There's a part of him, not all of him, but there is a part of him that wants out.
Exactly. Yeah. Can I just say, presidents who succeed, at least especially, are presidents who like and enjoy being president. I mean, if you go back to Franklin Roosevelt, for example, transformative president, people used to call him the happy warrior because he was cheerful, he was exuberant, he was funny. I mean, he could tell the most amazing jokes. I mean, you go and find the old newsreels of him. He was funny and happy and cheerful. Don't get that sense with Biden.
Yeah. Oh boy. Okay, I'm retail. Let's read this super chat. Okay. Even many American leaders put millions to death around the world and are continuing to do so. Would that make them any better than Stalin? Okay.
Well, I think the best thing to do.
We may have to discuss
Stalin. Well, we will of our historical programs. I don't think any political leader in the United States should be compared to Stalin. Actually, we're talking about people who are so profoundly different that it just isn't the place. The point, the comparisons just don't stack up. Actually,
I mean, look, there's a lot of myths, Alex. A lot analysts too that believe in a certain way that Stalin ruled was beneficial to Russia. There is that analysis out there, but I agree with you. We shouldn't. I mean, I think you're the right person to set the record straight on what exactly Stalin was about, and that time. More importantly, that time period in Russia.
Absolutely,
what it meant.
Absolutely. I mean, to bear in mind, it was a very, very singular time period. And Stalin is a singular leader, even in terms of Russian history, which is perhaps an important thing to take note of. I mean, there were autocratic rulers in Russia in the past, people like Peter the Great and Ivan Grozny, who's Ivan the Dread, not terrible, by the way. But anyway, Stalin was unique even amongst Russian leaders. I don't think you should compare him to people in the United States, and we will certainly get around to doing programs about him.
Yeah. All right. Heyman says, corporate profitability supersedes all. Both sides will have the fake culture war just to sleepwalk us to the same destination, a zombie democracy.
Again, as I said, I think that you are 95% right, but there's that 5% which in America makes all the difference in the end, because however hard they try and control the system, as I said, America's too complex, too vital a society to be controlled fully in that way. This election result that we've just had is not just theatre. Even if you have the most cynical view of Youngkin, it is nonetheless too clear a repudiation of the policies that they are wanting to follow for those who hold power to be comfortable or happy with this result.
Yeah. Let's see. In locals here, it says Biden was awakened by an aide. They told Biden that he would be the next FDR, didn't they? Actually, yeah. Well, I don't know if he was awakened. They definitely sent the aide over to wake him up. Yeah.
I mean,
there's no doubt about. Yeah.
Made the whole thing look even worse, in my opinion. I mean, the whole thing was just extremely worrying, and of course you can imagine them, all of the people in the background whispering to each other, saying what should they do, because he was clearly drifting off.
Yeah. By the way, Stalin isn't Russian; he is Georgian. I think there's interesting history in the fact that it was Stalin, Trotsky, and Lenin who were all part of the Bolshevik revolution. Correct?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, Stalin played a role in that as well.
Absolutely, he did. He very much bigger than people believe. For a long
he took out Trotsky too, didn't he?
He did. He did take out Trotsky. As I said, Stalin is such an enormous topic that maybe rather than discuss him in a program like this one, which is about elections in the US, I mean, he really deserves a standalone program, because we'll just end up talking all the time about him. And as I said, I think that the differences are so great that I think that this would be a comparison that would mislead more than it clarified.
Yeah. Magnesia Shan says, wanted to say that completely agreed. If Biden is my uncle, would like to make sure his eyes are properly rested.
I agree.
Thank you very much for that super chat. Magnesia Shan. And Zachary says, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi is third in line after Kamala for president.
Well, indeed, absolutely. But as I understand it, that would be if, let's say, Biden stepped down and then Kamala was removed by impeachment or some other way, either as part of the same process which brought about Biden's removal, or through, say, an impeachment process in which either the vice president she appointed was impeached alongside her, or alternatively, she hadn't had time to appoint a vice president. Now, I am not an expert in this, and I'm not entirely sure that there are actually full experts, but it's absolutely the case that the speaker is the third in line. But I don't know quite how that would work in this kind of system. I don't think anybody in the Democratic Party, by the way, envisages Nancy Pelosi becoming the next president of the United States.
She's actually made a statement where she said she's pretty much out if they lose the House.
Yeah,
I mean, she's kind of hinted at that. It's either Speaker of the House or nothing for her.
Absolutely. Well, she's to say straightforwardly, she's getting on it in years anyway. I mean, it's time she moved on.
Well, she's a very talented trader.
Oh,
Alexander, from what I understand.
She's a person of tremendous business skills. I mean, genius business skills. I mean, she's the greatest financier in America, apparently.
I mean, she constantly beats out all the experts when it comes to stock trading.
Absolutely,
yeah, so she's got a bright career there on Wall Street. Let's see. Rifi says, jab mandates, that gruesome book, and Ethiopians turned the VA Virginia red. U.S. put sanctions on Ethiopia, so the Ethiopians responded. That's an interesting comment.
It's an interesting comment. I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, I think it's more than that. I'm sure it's simply more than that. I mean, bear in mind again that Virginia was not an anomaly in this election. There were votes all across many parts of the U.S., and they all point in one direction: New Jersey, San Antonio, in other places too.
Yeah. Dan Noya says the electorate has demystified an entire system of rigged voting, MSM. The establishment don't know how to react or what to do.
I agree. And I think, by the way, that's something else, which I think it's important to say, which is that one of the great mistakes that, those who think themselves to be masters of the universe always make, and those who want to control political processes always make, is that they always assume that those they want to control and manipulate are stupid. they always make that mistake. They always think that deplorables can't really add up or figure it out, and of course they can. I come back to what I'm saying. I think this festering anger left over from last year is still there, and it is having a political effect.
Yeah. Let's see. Dida Pogue says, gentlemen, please invite Andrei Martyanov, author of Losing Military Supremacy, speaks out about how the U.S. is behind Russia.
He's a very interesting person to read. Now, I should say he's obviously somebody with a scientific, technological, and military background, and he's a brilliant writer. I would personally struggle to keep up with some of his mathematical points, but he's certainly somebody I would like to know and get into contact with. I've had, by the way, so we've had some indirect discussions because he has, to my knowledge, cited us in some of his blog pieces. So, absolutely.
That would be great if we could get him on. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Ema says, 100% agree with the previous super chat about Stalin. When he came to power, the USSR was backwards in every way. When he left, the USSR was a superpower. Boy, the Stalin super chats are really uncomfortable to read, but because we gotta, we need the oracle to.
I mean, as I said, this is such a vast topic. And the Soviet Union was indeed a superpower. But let's focus today on the US because Stalin is such a huge subject.
The only thing I'll do is I'll make a promo about our history shows that we have going on, and we'll get to all the time periods, and we're going to talk a lot about Russia. We'll talk a lot about Europe. We'll talk a lot about World War I. And we'll eventually get to World War II as well, Alexander, right? And we'll go into much more detail about all of the players in Europe at the time, and the US also, because the US and Japan and China, everything that was going on during that time period.
Absolutely.
We'll get to it.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. Can I just say, I said that Stalin would have the present leadership of the United States for breakfast, and that the present Russian leadership has them for breakfast. Sergei Lavrov, his meetings, he's had a couple of meetings now with Blinken, and they've been embarrassing from Blinken's point of view. But, if you go back to that time, the United States then was led by people like FDR. Britain was led by people like Winston Churchill. We had in the West leaders in those days. Whom do we have now? Certainly not, if you look at this administration, anybody remotely of that quality. All
right. Let's do one more. Hopefully the last Stalin super chat, which is from Jay Galt, says Stalin was right about the Trotskyites. Yeah, we'll cover all of it. We'll cover all of it, Alexander.
Indeed.
We're close on the history. We'll get close. I think it'll be like maybe 2-3 episodes, and we'll probably get to the Bolsheviks, right?
Absolutely. And can I just say on the subject, on the topic of the Trotskyists, of course, a lot of them ended up in the United States, where they eventually became neocons. It's a rather interesting process. But anyway, we'll talk about that too.
Didn't Trotsky have a relationship with Frida?
I think he did. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Yeah,
absolutely.
But as I said, a lot of the original neocons of the 70s and 80s had been Trotskyists in their younger years.
Yeah. All right. Winston says, where are we? Here we are. Winston says, I'm having the same job-hating feeling right now. At least I have the Duran to make it through the day. Thank you very much, Winston, for that. We've all been there. We've all been there. Absolutely. Winston says, can you recommend any books on the Bolsheviks and the Russian Revolution?
Well, there's heaps. There's so many. If you want the best book on the actual events that led up to the revolution, specifically the fall of the Tsar, is by a man called George Katkov, which is Russia 1917. If you want to get a good book on the Bolshevik Party, I would suggest going to Stephen Cohen's book about Bukharin. It was written way back in the 70s, but it's still, in my opinion, stacks up. There are any number of books about Stalin today. The best writer, in my opinion, is a person called Arch Getty, who works in Yale University, and he's a tremendous scholar and writer, and he has extraordinary things to say, and he's very much in contact with the Russian academic community. And I can never remember his first name, but there's an American historian called Gantz who writes brilliantly about Stalin's war leadership.
Yeah. Russell Hall says, didn't Ivan IV sack one of his own cities and slaughter as many as 60,000 people, cooking some of them alive in giant frying pans? Sounds pretty terrible.
I don't know about
Ivan the Terrible.
Yes, that's Ivan the Terrible, Ivan IV. Now, he did attack this city, which is Pskov, And if you go to Russian museums, you will find paintings about this. It's a rather terrifying event. But that particular story is invented, by the way. He didn't go quite to those bizarre lengths. I mean, he was a pretty extraordinary figure. But the point about Ivan the Terrible, in Russian, his name is Ivan Grozny. Grozny doesn't mean terrible. It means the awesome. So that's why, or the dread, the dread. It doesn't mean the terrible. It's not a good translation of the word.
Yeah. Let's see. Little Philly says, not a substantive super chat, but wanted you guys to know that I love your t-shirts so much. I bought 5. Thank you very much, Little Philly, for that. Our t-shirts are great t-shirts. They really do have a good feel and a good fit. And you're wearing today your Scotland.
Absolutely, you can see it's a sweatshirt actually. Cold day today.
Yep, with the Scottish flag right there. And
let's go. And you've got free Assange, which can I just say? I mean, lots going on there, and the omens are slightly more hopeful than we thought. Absolutely.
That's my Swiss hat.
That's your Swiss hat, by the way. And that's my Italian one.
Your Italy one. All right. One. Yes, the great Italian flag. Love that flag. Let's go to locals here. Someone has put up the actual succession for president and vice presidential succession. They've actually uploaded that. So thank you very much for putting that there. The history programs are excellent. Thank you very much for that. The Trots became the neocons. Very true. The only reason the USSR was a superpower was Wall Street, which purposefully built the boogeyman over many decades.
We're going to be talking about all of that. As I said, on our history programs.
Yep. Let's see. Regarding Assange, any news there? You mentioned
very briefly.
You're a little more confident.
Yeah, I'm I'm confident is putting it much too strongly. There was a hearing. We did a program about it, a short program, because we haven't got the decision. But there was a program. There were two things that there was a hearing rather. There were two things that stood out for me. Firstly, the lawyers who were acting for the US government didn't contest the Yahoo story about the CIA wanting to, planning to kill Assange or kidnap him or do any of those things. And bear in mind, if the court accepts that actually happened, very difficult to see how they could justify extraditing him to the US. And the second is that the Lord Chief Justice, Lord Justice Burnett, who presided over the case, he actually at the very end thanked the lawyers and said that the court had been given a lot to think about and that they would go away and consider it. Now that is a hopeful sign, because when a court has to think about extradition, that points to them deciding to refuse it. If you think about it, extradition should either be something very straightforward, you just extradite somebody. But if you have to think about it, that means you have doubts about it. And if you have doubts about it, that points to you not wanting to do it. But, this is a complicated situation, to put it mildly. One of the lawyers actually said that, nothing in this case has been normal. And that's an understatement. So, don't bank that. I'm just saying it was slightly more hopeful than I'd expected.
Yeah. And Rob Janu says, thanks for every word in support of Assange, gentlemen. We'll continue to cover the story, continue to follow it. And Alexander's also someone who's a bit he's got the inside down low on.
Well, I want to make it very clear. I mean, I'm not speaking daily with the legal team, and if I was anyway, I wouldn't be able to share what they said to me. But I mean, I'm not. But I know people who are fairly close, including people who have met Assange in prison and who've spoken to him. And, some of them, like Fidel Naves, for example, the former Ecuadorian consul, and, people who've actually gone to see him and met with him. And some of his lawyers are people whom I do know quite well. So, I'm reasonably well informed about what's going on.
Ken Barber says it's called the Parent Teacher Association, the PTA, because it used to be Parents First. In many cases, it should now be called the TPA. It's a Teachers Parents Association.
Why not?
I remember the PTAs when I was growing up in the US.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the teachers and suspects or organizations, because that's what the FBI and Mr. Garland would like them to be, I presume. Yeah. I mean, what exactly they're being surveyed for, by the way? I mean, bear in mind, they're being surveyed, even though there's no suggestion they could be prosecuted. So why survey them? I mean, it just doesn't make any kind of sense. What I would say is it's surveillance itself is worrying. It's been promoted by the Justice Department, carried out by the FBI, federal agencies, and it is beyond concerning.
Yeah, actually, I want to ask you, what did you make of Garland's testimony? I mean, he was, especially the exchange with Tom Cotton and Ted Cruz, I believe, were the notable ones, and Josh Hawley. I mean, he's very, I guess defiant would be a diplomatic word to use with Garland.
Yeah, but, I can understand.
An ideologue.
I was going to say, let me put it like this. I mean, I now understand why the Republicans objected to him so strongly when Barack Obama proposed him for the Supreme Court. I mean, he is an ideologue.
Yeah. Let's see. Big Bush Ape Tit says, thanks, guys. Cool super chat. Thank you very much for that. We appreciate it. And Rich says, Ivan Grozny was the one who made Russia powerful to the core. Stories were invented in the West to demonize him, as is done today. The first Tsar.
Well, indeed. And can I just...
was he the first Tsar?
He was the first person to be crowned Tsar. Okay. Many people were referred to as Tsar before that, but his official title up till then had been Great Prince of Moscow. Grand Duke, as it's sometimes mistranslated as, but Great Prince of Moscow. But by this point, Moscow had united all the various Russian principalities, and he proclaimed himself. He had himself crowned Tsar, in other words, Emperor of Russia. And the film that Sergei Eisenstein, the Soviet director, made of him in the 40s, partly during the Second World War, by the way, does capture an awful lot of his personality. And the actor who plays him, Cherkasov, is one of the greatest actors that there's ever been.
Yeah. A question from locals is, do you have any insight on Assange's physical health?
Deteriorating. He was extremely unwell during the hearing. People who saw him during the hearing were profoundly shocked, and I know for a fact that his doctors are very worried about him. And this is one of the most alarming facts, was of course the US government at that hearing were claiming that he wasn't as ill as he appeared to be, and of course he was. I mean, he's actually worse. I mean, the whole thing was just embarrassingly awful, actually.
Yeah. All right. We got all the questions. We covered a lot of topics, Alexander. A quick announcement. You'll be doing, are you going to be doing a live stream on Locals tonight?
I absolutely am. I should explain that there's lots of things going on in my personal life.
Do you have anything that you would like to share with the community here, or do you not?
I will say,
I'll leave it to you.
Why
I think it's great news, but it's up to you.
Absolutely.
We haven't said anything. And this is why last week things were a little up and down.
And still this week, briefly, my wife gave birth to 2 children, our first 2 children, last week on Thursday. So as you can imagine, last week was very, very busy, and this week has been equally busy. And obviously, the first thing I'm going to do after we finish this program is going to dash off and see her and help her with all the things that one has to do. I'm busy ironing, making, feeding people, doing all the things that fathers are required to do. So and loving every moment of it and getting exhausted. But as you can also see, I remain very committed to our programs, because they're also not just anything else, but they're a tremendous form of relaxation, actually. I mean, being able to think about these topics and engage with people and talk with them and discuss things. So I had a discussion earlier today with my wife. She was absolutely insistent that I should do this live stream, and it will be at 1900 hours London time this evening. I will put up a notice in a moment shortly on locals. It'll be on locals. It has to be on locals. But if you want to join me for that live stream, do so then.
1900 hours LDN time, London time, everybody. And that is Alexander's wonderful news. And that's why last week we were a little up and down, but we got all our shows in as always, because
absolutely,
we absolutely just enjoy just being with all of you guys.
Absolutely,
we really love it.
Absolutely. I mean, if you've noticed, there's been one or two little gaps. I mean, I wasn't able to put up a video on my channel yesterday. And
I think you only skipped one beat.
I think so. But we're getting a routine anyway. So probably things will work out. But I mean, before people worry, I should make it very clear that I absolutely love doing these programs. My wife is very keen that I should do them. She thinks that they're very good for me to do them. I think the same. So you should, here I will come.
And here's a super chat from Didapog, which says, "Congrats! Remember, your children equals fun."
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for that. And Toilet Sauce came in with a big super chat, a 50 € super chat. Thank you, Toilet Sauce, for sponsoring this show. There is a story where, during the times the Tatar yoke, the Pope told the Russians he would support them militarily if they converted to Roman Catholicism. The Russians replied that in that case, they would stick with the Mongols. Is that true? Have you heard of that?
I believe it is true, actually. The Russians were, and by the way, still are very committed to their Orthodox faith. In some ways, more so even, dare I say, than the Greeks are. I mean, they've had to fight for it, and they've had to fight for it very hard in the last century. And it's fascinating to see how intensely connected they are to their church, and they were then.
My final question as we wrap up the live stream is to you, Alexander, once again on this topic, because I'm interested to see if this is true or not. Is it true that when Vladimir was choosing the religions for Russia, that he was, one of the reasons he chose Orthodoxy is that he was impressed watching I believe it was the Greeks or the Greek monks coming over in gold-plated ships, and he thought they looked impressive, majestic, godly. Is that true or not?
Well, that is true, but there's also, and we know this, that his ambassadors went to Constantinople, to the court of the emperor, and they were tremendously impressed by the service in Hagia Sophia. By this point, Vladimir, by the way, had basically decided that he was Christian. He wasn't sure whether he would become a Catholic Christian, a Western Christian, or an Orthodox Christian. And the ambassadors said that, when they saw what had happened, when they participated in the service in Hagia Sophia, they felt that they'd been transported to heaven. Then Vladimir, who is of course Saint Vladimir in Russia, learned about monks. He began to associate and get a greater knowledge of Orthodox people, and he decided that that was the choice that he would make. And the interesting thing is that the Russians followed him. I mean, there was very little resistance in Russia to the conversion of the Russian people to Orthodoxy, and it happened remarkably quickly and with very little resistance.
Yeah. Kurt says, I just wanted to say that I enjoyed the show. Thank you very much, Kurt, for that super chat. And we do have another service, Alexander, which I'm going to put up on the side and I'll announce to people, which is it's durantv.com, where we have all the shows just playing in continuous mode. It's really cool. And I'll announce that too on the communities for YouTube, Rumble. I'll put that on locals as well, and I'll put that URL there, durantv.com, where we just have, I mean, literally just go on the website, just see all our videos just playing 24/7. If you want to just spend time with us 24/7, that's a good place to go as well. A lot of congratulations everywhere, Alexander, on locals as well. Thank you. And I just go in there and you can read all the congratulations as well. And I think that's it. We've covered everything. Any final words with regards to Virginia, with the fact that Virginia may have saved the United States of America with an incredible election result? Anatoly sends a super sticker. Thank you very much, Anatoly, for that super sticker. Really appreciate it. Any final thoughts, Alexander?
No, the one thing I'm going to say is, as I said, the Democrats are going to be very angry, and angry people are dangerous people. So don't assume that this is going to be easy from now on. We're going to have a very rocky year. Expect more pressure, more social media pressure, more bans, more restrictions, more warnings, more threats, all of that sort of thing.
But it's a position of panic that they're doing this from, not from a position of strength, correct?
Correct, exactly. They're feeling it's slipping out of their control.
All right. We will leave it there. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us on this live stream. Thank you to our moderators as well. Let me get those names in there. Let me see all the blue wrenches there in the stream. Alan Watson, Reckless Abandon, Valley S, GEC, and did I miss anybody? I don't think so. To all our moderators, thank you very, very much for helping us out. To all the super chats, everybody on the Duran.locals.com. Alexander at 1900 hours London time will be on there. I will also be there as well, listening and learning. And to everyone in the live stream, the live chat, thank you very much for your great questions and comments, and for all of your support. And hey, man, dropped a super chat in right now, which says, Alexander's right. If they push too much, they'll get Knights Templar. All right, hey, man. On that note, we will end this live stream. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you hopefully in a couple of hours.
And thank you for your thank you, everybody, for your very kind and generous words.
Big up, Virginia. Absolutely. Big up, Virginia. Great results. Take care.